And then at one point, actually, because of a suggestion by David Ficarro, we started organizing trips to Stewart Detention Center. And our first one was in fall of 2017. We then ended up organizing 13 journeys from Greensboro in all. Our last one was right under the wire in March 2020, right before everything shut down. And over 90 people from Greensboro and the surrounding areas took these trips to go to a detention center where many of our community members who are picked up by ICE end up, if temporarily and for varying amounts of time. And I want to explain just a little bit about how the trips looked, what they were like, so that you could sort of focus on the details that you're going to hear, because in tonight's program, you'll hear some of the contributors to this book that we've put out read from their own experiences. But essentially, these were very intense, almost always 2-day trips. The 8 to 10 people would gather in the morning, very early in the morning, 7 o'clock, climb into a van and drive 8 hours down to Georgia, where they would gather at El Refugio, a hospitality house, a scant mile from the detention center. And there, the staff and volunteers at El Refugio would give our group an orientation. We brought food. We became infamous for bringing way too much food, but that was okay. And so they would have El Refugio provided with an excellent orientation of what everyone could expect the next day at the detention center. El Refugio was also key in matching our visitors up with folks in detention who were interested in visiting. The group would then travel to the nearest hotel, which was 40 minutes away, spend the night, get up very bright and early the next morning, be back at Stewart by 8 a.m., and wait in shifts to have a 1-hour visit with a person who's experiencing detention. They then would return. That would take about 2-3 hours. They would return to El Refugio, have a little bit of a time to start processing what they'd experienced. And by 1 p.m., they were back in the van for the 8-hour trip home. So this was a intense experience over a short amount of time. And what as the group who was organizing, providing the logistics for these trips, what we did is that sometime, maybe a week or two after the trip, we would gather the group together again, give them a chance to think about and reflect about what they had seen. And we encouraged them to share their experiences, either with faith communities or community organizations or on social media, emphasizing that they had something very precious, firsthand experience of what about 50,000 people every day experience in the United States detention system. And that we were moved by a fairly simple ethical mandate, that if this detention is happening to tens of thousands of our neighbors with our tax dollars in our names, the least we could do is be aware of it. The least we could do is witness what was being done in our names. And so as these trips continued and the list of people who had been on them continued to grow, at some point last summer, we thought about this project, gathering together some of these impressions, some of these experiences in a book. Very much conducive, very much in alignment with FINE's original mission, which is to educate ourselves and then to help educate our community about the impact that these policies have on our neighbors and our communities as a whole. And that's how this book came about. And in just a few minutes, we're going to hear from the lead editor of the book and the artist who provided such wonderful images as part of the book to talk about a little bit about what happened at that point. But at this point, I want to invite the executive director of El Refugio to chime in a little bit. As I said, El Refugio was central to our being able to offer these experiences to folks. And Amilcar Valencia, who's with us tonight, was just always such a just helpful and reliable partner in these journeys that I wanted to make sure we learned a little bit more about him and the work at El Refugio. So Amilcar, if you could unmute yourself and talk to us a little bit about El Refugio.
Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone who is joining today. My name is Amilcar Valencia, as you mentioned, director of El Refugio. You have shared information about what we do and how the group from Greensboro has been visiting people since 2017. Our organization has started to welcoming families at the attention at the hospitality house in 2010, and visiting people detained around the same time. As to where is very remote, especially for you all who were driving from Greensboro. Any detains people who are in contact with immigration in the Carolinas and Georgia, as well people who are detained at the U.S.-Mexico border, asylum seekers who are coming asking for protection. So our organization has been providing a shelter, a refuge for families who are visiting their loved ones at the detention center. The city of Lumpkin, where the detention center is located, is it's about 2.5 hours from the city of Atlanta. The closest hotel is in Columbus, Georgia, which is about 40 minutes away. So there is actually no other facility that can offer, welcoming space for families and people who are visiting their loved ones at the detention center. And that's why we opened a refugio at the hospitality house in 2010. And as you mentioned, we are being had the opportunity to establish long relationship with people who are detained, learning from them what is it that they're going through in this detention facility, and we got firsthand knowledge about their you know their abuses inside of the facility, the neglect that they suffer, um, and overall, I mean, the conditions inside of the facility. Most importantly, we want to be, advocate for their release, and have been doing that in different ways. And one of the ways, as you have mentioned, is that people at least understands the issue a little bit closer by putting yourself in a very, just doing the same journey that the families who have loved ones detained do, to just go there, to go to this, fairly large detention facility, to understand and accompany someone who is on the other side of the glass. Um, so through that opportunity, we've been able to educate people. People have been able to understand the system a little bit better, and hopefully that's an opportunity for people to go back to their communities and see how that is affecting their own communities, their neighbors, right? Because you are driving from the Carolinas. We have a lot of people from the Atlanta area, and the people who are ended up in detention proceedings are our neighbors, people who live among our communities, and they ended up in this process because they are lack of documentation, or because they come in a contact with the law enforcement, and through that experience is an opportunity for them to not just to see how the system works, but how the system is not working and how broken the system is, that the inhumane treatment that people live and suffers inside a detention center is linked to what people are in the criminal justice system go through the same, right? The same reality, the reality of the for-profit part of the detention centers, and the reality of the human suffering, the human cost that these detention facilities have, the pain that they inflict in our communities and immigrant communities and asylum seekers in general. So this is an opportunity again to continue educating our people in our community, and doing so by doing basic things, by offering hospitality, by having a conversation, by guiding people through the visitation process, making sure that people is engaged with the issue, and it's not just a field trip. It's not something that you just go, and it's an experience that is for many very profound, and leaves like a great impact in their life, and they want to do something with that information that they have learned, and many people become more engaged, or find again ways in their community to advocate for immigrants who are placed in this facility.
Great. Thank you so much, Amilcar. And again, thank you for the work that you've done for so long with El Refugio. Um, it's been incredibly important to so many communities. So I thank you for that. We're going to hear now from our lead editor, a member of FIND, Mary Coyne Wesling, and Sage Betts, who is the artist who provided the images that are found throughout the book. And I thought that they could speak just a little bit about the process of putting the book together. And then after that, we're going to hear some excerpts from multiple contributors to the book so you can get a little bit of taste of what you definitely want to go out and purchase. So Mary and Sage, could you unmute and talk to us a little bit about what it was like to put the book together?
Sure. First of all, I feel very honored to be here tonight to speak about this project. I want to start by saying that I think that this book proves we have done away with the myth that nothing can be done by committee, because we absolutely did it all by committee. And it was the passion and the compassion and the dedication of many people that got this book done. So we started with, and it was all voluntary, and we started with people from the FIND committee, but then other people offered to be a part of the collection process, whereby they reached out to the people who had gone down to the detention center and asked them if they would provide reflection of their time traveling down there and being there and then traveling back, and what kind of impact that had on them. So Linda Bostic headed up that committee, and then there were some people who chose not to write their own reflections, their own essays, but they were willing to be interviewed. So by the time my committee, which basically consisted of myself and Kara Rothberg and Beth Woodward, we had a collection of several essays, over 20, and we had interviews from a number of people. To say that it was easy for us to pick the best to put this book together, I would be lying. It was almost impossible. We considered every word that every person wrote sacred. And so we tried to honor that. And we looked at what they wrote and what they wrote about. And then it kind of fell almost into categories of certain people would describe the places, and then certain people would describe who they encountered. And then several people, of course, wanted to talk about the people they visited. So it took some work, but we got that all together, and we really went over and over and over the material to make sure that we were putting it in not only a logical order, but an order that really spoke to people, that really gave someone an opportunity to read this very short book, but walk away with a true sense of what all of these contributors had experienced in a very real way. And then Kara and I especially, really did that organizing. And then it got to the place where we knew that we wanted to have artwork to accompany it. So now I'm going to hand over the reins to Sage Hannah Betts. And Sage is going to talk about how she became involved in our project.
Hi guys, thanks for having me. I don't know anyone here but Mary Coyne, so this is always nice to be introduced to a whole new group of people. Mary Coyne and my mom are friends, and so I have known her for a long time, and we are neighbors as well. When she emailed me, I think, or I forget, maybe she called me and asked me if I wanted to be involved, and of course I never answer my phone because I'm always too busy with my kids. She left me a message, we chatted, and she told me about a book that she wanted me to be involved with. And honestly, I said yes before I knew much about what it was going to be. She did go over a little bit of the background of the book, and I was pretty much wanting to be involved in some way, shape, or form. as an artist, I think it's hard sometimes for us to be current and have current events in your art. And that's something I'm trying to master, is how to create images that are meaningful for people. The first day we met, and I might cry, the first day we met, she started telling me these stories. And I cried, and I think Mary cried, and we sat there and we laughed and cried. And the images were just so strong for me. And I'm a watercolorist, and I do a lot of black and white imagery with my watercolor. And I knew that I think we were supposed to talk for about an hour, and I think we chatted for about 2.5. I knew that my art was going to be perfect for this, because I really, with the vivid imagery that she gave me, I could already imagine the father and a son or a child trying to speak through a glass door, like this imagery of this, dirty, scratched glass and telephone. And I really wanted to have some one color in there that really expressed something within each image. And so in that image, the phone is red. And in every image, I did one red element, just because I think red is such a color of awareness, and it's bold, and it's strong, and it's hurtful maybe. And I just thought it was a great way to characterize these black and white images with this one stark color to be in each image. So that's kind of like the process I went through. I did a lot of research online. I want you to say there's not much that you can find about Lumpkin, Georgia, or the detention center in general. So then I started looking for different imagery just to wrap my head around it. But honestly, Mary Coyne did a fabulous job, and everybody who wrote the stories did a fabulous job being able to create the image of the waiting room for me, in particular with the cramped chairs and the guards and the pictures that were on the wall and nothing else on the wall. It was just so easy to paint. And I won't say it was hard. It wasn't easy to paint because it was hard emotionally, but the imagery was easy to grasp by the description of the writers.
Thank you so much, Sage. And I see in the chat that some folks are asking if we can see images of the watercolors. And I know some of our contributors who are going to speak tonight have the book. So we're going to actually start with excerpts in just a minute. And I might ask folks who are reading excerpts if there are images that they can hold up, just like we did in kindergarten. It's always a good idea to do what you did in kindergarten. So we can see some of Sage's work. That would be great, but not too much, because we don't want to, give away the store. Thank you so much to Mary and Sage for that glimpse of the process. I'd like to invite Faith Action's Director of Operations, Ineris Reddick, to unmute. And Ineris is going to share with us some words of a Faith Action client whose family has been directly impacted by detention. Ineris?
Hi, good evening, everyone. And I must say that I love your voice. You sound like a DJ. You sound like a DJ. I think it's so cool. I couldn't do it even if I tried. You have the perfect voice. I'm just waiting for you to play Magic Night, I don't know, whatever they call it. Anyways, my name is Ineris Reddick, like Anne introduced me, and I was given the task of identifying a client that was able to share with us the experience that they went through when their husband was detained. And she wanted to be here today, but she felt a little intimidated. She was worried that there were going to be maybe government agencies on the line or something like that, and I guarantee her that it was not the case, that it was just us, but she was not comfortable. But she gave me permission to share with her. When I made that phone call that day, and I introduced myself, and I told her, hey, Teresa, I would like to ask you in regards to your husband experience. The first thing you say, ay Dios mío, señor. Oh my God, ma'am, That was the first expression that came out of her mouth, and it was so sad because she was, I think she was taken back there, and she was really sad. So I asked her if she could share with me what her husband is, just an update about everything. Her husband is in Guatemala right now. He haven't been able to reunite with his family. But however, this is what she shared with me. If it's okay with everybody, I can read it in Spanish and then in English, or just go straight to English. Is that okay? Can I get a thumbs up?
You can do it both, please, Inés.
Thank you, thank you. Yes, ma'am. So the first thing she said, me ayudaron en gran manera porque tengo diabetes. Mi salud se afectó mucho por la situación de mi esposo. Gracias a Dios y a tu organización estoy bien. She said, you guys helped me tremendously because I have diabetes. My health was affected by my husband's situation, and thanks God for your organization. So I asked her, can you give me details in regards to the 6 months that your husband was stored? She said, fue algo muy triste porque mi esposo fue positivo, dio positivo al COVID-19, no tenía ningún síntoma y lo aislaron por 15 días sin medicina, no se pudo bañar, no tenía luz y le daban comida por un pequeño espacio. My husband suffered very much those 6 months. He was positive to COVID-19. He didn't have any symptoms. They isolated him for 15 days without medicine because no medicine. He couldn't take a shower. He didn't have electricity. He didn't have any food to eat. They just gave him a tiny bit of food through a small space. He was en completo silencio, se sentía muy solo y no podía ni tan siquiera bañarse. He was very lonely. He was in complete silence, unable to talk to anyone, not to even take a shower. And they even kept him longer than he was supposed to because they just did. And she started crying, and after that, and she said that they have no hope, they have no means, no resources. The Find Group and Faith Action sent her money. I'm not sure what kind of money that was. And with that money, as soon as he arrived to Guatemala, with nothing in his pocket but that money, he was able to eat food for 3 days. And that's her story.
Thank you, Inés, and please thank her on our behalf for being willing to share that story. It's an important reminder, too, that the infamous family separation policies that got so much attention some months ago were not the first time that immigration policies require the separation of families in very violent and oppressive ways. So now we're going to turn to some excerpts from the book, some contributors who contributed different things in different forms. I'm going to let each contributor introduce themselves and then read a portion of what they contributed to this work. And Sophia, if you'd unmute yourself, you'd be first.
Thank you, Anne. So my name's Sofia Mosquera. I've been a Greensboro resident for about 15 years. My family and I moved to the States when I was 10 years old from Colombia. And when I did this journey, it was probably now 2 years ago. I was actually working for Faith Action, helping coordinate some of these journeys down to Stewart. I'm now working at Elon Humanitarian Immigration Clinic, working directly with asylum seekers and refugees. But yeah, I'm just going to read a little bit of what I wrote, and yeah, that's it. It's called Out of Sight. Out of sight, out of mind, as the common phrase goes. 481 miles to your destination, reads the GPS. The location details right below on Google Maps describe it as prison. Hours and hours and hours upon Georgia forests and fields. No sidewalks, no towns, no turns. An occasional gas station, a pleasure house 3 blocks down from the center, 2 restaurants. Out of sight, out of mind. Down a little paved road lies a concrete box wrapped in wire and intimidation. Stark contrast of gray against the golden foliage of trees behind it. Deposite su dinero aquí. Ahora rápido y más fácil. Another twisted irony, the only instructions in Spanish in the entire building. Security line, conveyor belt, metal detector, deadbolt door, rails. A little hall with a community board advertising the staff's Secret Santa and December raffle. More rails, another deadbolt, another door. Tiny cubicles lined with telephones. A 3x2 window of glass between the visitor and visited, but just thick enough to remove any trace of intimacy. A pang of nerves and a thick lump in the throat as detainees walk in. Lined in a row, dressed in multicolored jumpsuits, heaviness in their posture as if carrying invisible cinder blocks upon their backs and chains between their feet. Out of mind, out of sight. Just tell my children that I love them and todo va a salir bien. Tell my daughter that I'm rooting all the way from here for her first soccer match this weekend. Time's up, the guards yell, jarring and dismissive. We wrap up our conversation, plagued by the fear of not being a sufficient messenger, knowing that I am not. Out of sight, out of mind. There's more to that, but we don't want to give it all away, so you can read the rest in the book.
Thank you very much, Sophia. And next up, could Julie Peoples please unmute herself and introduce herself?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm Julie Peoples. I'm pastor at Congregational UCC here in Greensboro. And here's part of what I wrote. The last thing I expected to find in the tiny town of Lumpkin, Georgia, was hope. It's where the infamous Stewart Detention Center sprawls out, massive and gray, nearly windowless, forbidding and wrapped in layers of razor wire. We pass through outer steel gates into the tiny lobby where visitors check in, hand over their ID, and go through searches. Each of us came with a name and number for a detainee. We were ushered through more thick metal doors that clanged loudly behind us, past armed guards, finally entering another small cinder block room with 5 cubicles, each with a plexiglass window and a phone. Though Stewart is a civil detention center, it has the feel of a criminal jail or prison. I sat in a green plastic chair across from a young man with dark curly hair and sad, weary eyes. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit, 31 years old. He was brought to the US as a child by his parents. He spoke perfect English with a New York accent, as he had lived there much of his life. At some point, he had moved south with his wife and 2 young children. He'd been at Stewart for 7 months, still bewildered at how suddenly his life was turned upside down after a minor traffic accident. We talked for a while, and I asked him what he wanted people to know about the place. His voice became quieter as he glanced over his shoulder. "The water," he whispered. "The water is black. It's horrible. We complained to the authorities, but all they say is that they're working on it, and it never gets better. No human should be treated this way," he said in hushed tones. In the month before our visit, a 33-year-old man had died of pneumonia there after never being sick a day in his life. I did not find hope in the Stewart Detention Center. I saw despair on the faces of an extended family saying goodbye to another young man from across the plexiglass. Their husband, father, brother was soon to be deported. There were haggard faces of the guards who resisted making eye contact and who themselves looked sad and heavy burdened. There were detainees who had shown up at a border asking for asylum after fleeing violence in their home country, only to be transported to the middle of Georgia without even being told where in the country they were or how to get a lawyer or make a phone call. There have been multiple reports of food that is inedible, water that is undrinkable, health care that is nearly non-existent. Only a tiny percentage of those who enter are ever released into freedom. There are people who are making huge profits over the abject suffering taking place in this and other for-profit detention centers, aided and abetted by our tax dollars. So no, that is not where I found hope. I found hope a few blocks away at El Refugio. And I will end mine there.
Thank you, Julie. As I mentioned at the beginning, the book contains lots of different genres. There's poetry, there's some narrative, there's some short stories from different perspectives. And throughout the book, there are pages with individual quotations from multiple people who've been on the trips. And Pat Rogers is now going to read a selection of those very short contributions. So Pat, if you could unmute yourself.
Thanks, Ann, and thank you everybody for being here. My name is Pat. I'm an engineer in the Greensboro area, and I've been working with Faith Action for a couple of years now. So I wanted to share some thoughts that people had on the really the waiting room and the guards were kind of the main people they interacted with. Jeannie Holmes says, "It was smaller than I expected. There was a lack of clear direction when you walked into the waiting room. There aren't signs that explain what the steps are to visit a detained person. There wasn't great customer service." Kara Rothberg shared, "The first thing that surprised me was how arbitrary the rules felt. You couldn't take anything with you. There wasn't enough seating. It felt like they didn't care whether people got visited or not." Alice Frank said, "There's a dress code for visitors, and they kind of enforce it or not. They can send whole families away." Rod Roberts shared, "Inside, there are about 24 chairs tightly packed into a waiting area and a high counter behind which uniformed security kept a watchful eye. One guard was fairly sympathetic to us, but the other 4 or 5 made a point of being distant, all business firm." And some of my reflections that I have from my trip were that an older couple visiting their son chaperoned their grandchildren. They struggle with the English instructions on the paperwork, but the system for adding to a detained person's commissary fund provided their instructions in Spanish. And that was the only Spanish that there was in the room. Later on during my trip, I remember that this was the point where the clerk informed us that the detainee had declined our visit. I was crushed. An angry voice in the back of my head suggested that guards lied to us or lied to the detained person, but I recognized that we had no way to coordinate our visit with him beforehand. That Sunday morning may just not have been the right time for a chat with 2 strangers who wanted to help, who'd ask questions through a telephone and a glass window. We get to sleep in their own beds that night. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Pat. And now I'd like to invite Hector to unmute himself and introduce himself and his contribution, which is a little bit different than some of the others.
Gracias, and thank you, and buenas noches a todos. Mi nombre es Héctor Ancísar Gómez Argote. My name is Héctor Ancísar Gómez Argote. I am originally also from Colombia. I'm an immigrant. I am a teacher, and I've been in the United States for 13 years. The visit I paid to Lumpkin and the detention center, I think I was part of the first group that visited, and it helped me understand some of the things my students have to go through. Because sometimes we at education, at schools, we don't know what these families are going through, and visiting this place really opened my eyes and helped me understand some of the situations of these families. So, and I think that today is the perfect day to launch this book because it's October the 12th and it's Indigenous Peoples Day. So I think this is perfect. I wrote a short expert of my visit. It's called An Imagined Day. And I'm just gonna read one paragraph to you all. And it goes like this. It's a quiet Sunday morning. Elle waits for my morning call. I wonder how S is doing. She's 3 months old now. Does she look like me? Is she healthy? What's she wearing? I want to hug her, kiss her, hold her, see her eyes and tell her I love you. I am proud of Elle. She has a new job and is working hard to support S and some of my costs here. She has not been able to come visit. This place is too far to travel with an infant, and we don't have much money, no relatives to support us. It's a lonely Sunday morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Hector. And our final excerpt this evening, after which we will hear from David Fricaro, the Executive Director of Faith Action, and we will have some time for Q&A after that. But for our final selection, this is a co-authored piece. So if Maria and Julie could unmute and introduce yourselves.
Hi, my name is Maria Gonzalez. I am also from Colombia. I guess the Colombians are represented tonight. I have been in Greensboro for about 19 years, and this will be my 23rd year living in the United States. My family and I, we were granted political asylum in 2000. And when I think about many of the stories and many of the families that probably are going through the same process that we went through, I think about, like their stories and our story, and we're not any more special than they are. We're not, better people or harder workers than any of them. They probably are much better than many of us. So I had the opportunity to go to Stewart or visit Stewart 3 times. From the first one, and I don't know if I was on the last one. On the last visit that I did, I went with my 17-year-old son, and he had the opportunity to be in. I'm gonna try to make it through. It's just very hard, but talking to the young man that he was on the other side, and at the end he said, the only thing different between him and I is that plexiglass. We both love soccer. We love both families. We both love Harry Potter. And it's just how do you say it in English? Like the straw of the lock or the straw. So, which I did not know that term. And I was just like, why are you saying that? And he said, there is nothing that compares. I'm just on this side. And we were the lucky ones. So. This one was from my second trip to Stewart. Jay was picked up by ICE when he was getting in the car to go to work. When questioning Jay, an ICE agent accused him of doing drugs and said that they could see that he was high from his red eyes. Jay told them that he had an eye infection and he doesn't do drugs. He showed the agents the medications prescribed. The agents laughed at him, threw the medication on the ground, and kicked it away from him. As Jay tells us this, he held his picture ID to the plexiglass window in the visitation room so we could point to his red eye captured in the photo the day he arrived at Stewart. When handcuffing Jay, the ICE agents removed Jay's jacket and put into the ICE vehicle. Although it was very cold that morning, they rolled down the back windows and refused to give his jacket back from warmth, while the agents drank hot coffee and their windows were up. Jay asked several times to roll the windows up. They replied, "No comprende," and laughed at him. Jay asked to call his wife. They told him that he could, but never allowed him to call. Upon arrival at the local detention, Jay heard other ICE agents talking about how many people they had caught. After a few days there, Jay and other detainees are shackled at their waist, hands, and feet and put on the bus for the 10-hour drive to Stewart. It was extremely hot on the bus. The riders were thirsty and hungry. Although there were plenty of water bottles, they were denied water and food for over 10 hours. Despite the repeated request, The agents stopped at a fast food restaurant. One of them walked up and down the bus aisle, eating, telling everybody how delicious his big burger and Coke were, laughing. He told the detainees that if they ever got out on bond, they really should try number 4 on the menu.
My name is Julie Bean, and I live here in Greensboro. I'm a member of Temple Emmanuel and the immigration committee there. And I went to Stewart Detention Center with a group organized by Find, I think it was 2 years ago. And here is part of my reading. Once they arrived at Stewart, Jay's hunger worsened. The food is inadequate in quantity and quality. Detainees have no choice but to spend their money at the commissary to buy exorbitantly priced food to try and suppress the pain of hunger. Jay saves money to buy a small envelope of powdered milk for $7, but it is not enough to keep him from losing significant weight due to insufficient nutrition. Jay holds his picture ID from his first day at Stewart up to the plexiglass so we can see. We are shocked at how thin his face has become after 13 weeks at Stewart. Jay earns $1 to $2 a day cleaning. Stewart forces people they are detaining to work, doing all the cooking, cleaning, and maintenance. Jay uses his money at the commissary to buy overpriced food, toiletries, and phone cards to call his family. We cannot hear all that Jay is saying due to the static on the phone, which he says doesn't work. Jay's family cannot afford to make the 18-hour round trip to Stewart to visit him. He talks about his love for his wife and children and how much he misses them, how unbearable the pain is to be apart, and how extremely worried he is about them. As we talk to Jay, we notice someone has scratched the words, "Daddy, I love you," into the plexiglass in the visiting room. Jay's wife is worried about him too. To try and lessen some of her worries, Jay tells her that he earns more money than he actually does, so his wife thinks he is able to buy more food than he can. Jay becomes quiet and teary-eyed. Another excerpt. Back on the van with our fellow travelers, we have no words. We weep and struggle to process the abuse and horror of what we have just witnessed. What country are we in? Is this really the American government purposely inflicting human suffering through the systematic, inhumane, and cruel treatment of people? What country contracts with a for-profit company that withholds food, withholds medicine to people in their care in order to get rich? Why has America forsaken its values? One of us takes a deep breath, gets out her notebook, and documents what we saw and heard. We are deeply committed to tell Jay's story, to make visible what our government tries to make invisible, and to fight for justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria and Julie. And again, that's just a small bit. Oh, and Maria is showing one of Sage's amazing watercolors, and Hector is showing another. So if you can see Hector and Maria, you can see a little bit of a preview of the artwork in the book. Now I'd like to invite David Fracaro, Executive Director of Faith Action, to unmute and to tell us a little bit about Faith Action and announce an exciting new initiative.
Yeah, first I want to say that I'm very moved by what everybody wrote, and hearing your voice shared as well kind of takes me back to my first visit. I started visiting shortly after 9/11 in New York and New Jersey, and I remember the first visit I kind of asked the driver to stop for a second, and I started to dry heave on the side of the road because didn't quite fully understand what I had just seen. And I started visiting almost every week for about 8 years. And as the visits went on, I started to get normalized to what I was seeing. And I found myself less willing to risk really doing something strong to raise some ruckus about this. And I guess I would just simply say to everybody who's been, to everybody who hasn't been but has moved, and I'm guessing most people feel it, you know, in your heart when you're hearing people read. I'm guessing many of us are having a similar experience right now. You know, just try not to get normalized to it, and really follow that place in your heart and risk doing something very bold out of love for your neighbors that are having to go through this. And these are just a few stories of tens of thousands across the country. And so, you know, there was a part of me that at that time that really wished I had just camped outside and just stayed there and risked arrest over and over and over again. And I don't know, maybe we can go and do that together down in Georgia. But in the meantime, I'm really excited to do this work alongside of Faith Action staff, volunteers, board members, and our clients, and to announce that we have along with a book, with this wonderful book launch, to announce a $20,000 bond fund that we're going to provide through Faith Action for our clients and friends that experience detention. Over the last several years, we see about 1 case of detention a week, and most of the folks in North Carolina are either sent to Stewart or the other detention center where we've heard about the concerning medical practices at Irwin. And as you heard in some of the intros, very few people get the option for bond, and even those that do, the bond can cost anywhere from $3,000 to $15,000 to get out. But getting out can be absolutely life-changing, if not life-saving, for the people that have it. But then you not only have the bond funds, you also have the legal fees to pay for attorneys, et cetera. So for a long time, Faith Action have been paying for legal consultations so people get legal advice, and commissary funds for phone cards, but we realized we needed to do more if we could. We know that $20,000 is a large amount of money, but is small when it comes to how many people it may be able to help inside. So we are really going to be partnering with numerous individuals, congregations, to hopefully make up the entire bond amount so that people don't have to go to predatory loan companies and bond companies where they pay a 25% or higher interest rate and are kind of detained in a different way once they're out. So we're asking the public to match that bond fund so that we can get up closer to $40,000 by the end of the year so that we can help as many people as possible and really sustain this well into the future. So would ask that you please consider that as one great effort that you could make. I think Steve will probably post in chat the link that you can go to donate. We just ask that you specify that it is for the Immigration Bond Fund. And again, we plan to get back to these visits once it's okay to do so again. We did receive a grant from Z. Smith Reynolds to fund these trips for another 2 years. So I think we're eager to get back. But I again, really would encourage everybody and all the people that you know and where you have influence to not only raise awareness in our local community, but to surprise yourself, do something bold. Don't get normalized to what this is. And I'm just glad that we have a book like this to remind ourselves not to get normalized. So I hope that the book brings as much emotion and motivation to do something for you as it did for me, and nothing but tremendous respect for all the volunteers that made Find and this book happen, all out of the, all because they were determined out of their volunteer time. It's remarkable what they've done. And Emil Clark has been a part of visitation programs for a long time. I can tell you it's quite remarkable. So thank you, friends, for listening. Yeah, just thank you.
Thanks, David. And I just want to add something. I really am so excited about this bond fund for Faith Action. Although it is available to very few people who are currently experiencing detention, if posting bail is possible, that can mean years of 2 to 3 years, because the line at the immigration court is so very long, 2 to 3 years of essentially having status and not having to be worried about being picked up, not having to be worried about your family being separated. So for those individuals, it's a transformative possibility. So that concludes our formal program. We do have some time for Q&A. And Steve, I don't know if you have a particular approach to Q&A that you'd like to use.
Well, I think people, if they want to put questions into chat, we'll make sure they're directed. And if they want to unmute and ask their question, that's fine too. And I think it can be a general question, or it can be to a specific person, whichever you like. So we can just open it up for about 15 minutes if people have questions or comments they want to make. And if not, okay too.
And I know we have a lot of people here, some of whom we have more contributors to the book that are present on the call. We also have people who have been on the journey. So there's a lot of expertise in this particular cyber room right here.
And is the link that is in the chat the only way to get the book?
We would love it if everyone got the book through Scuppernong. That is our pride of, our community pride. It's also available, as the saying goes, wherever books are sold. So if you do a quick search for Making Our Way to Lumpkin, you'll find it there. But we would love it if everyone would order it through Scuppernong. Also, if you make a donation to the New Bond Fund, you will get a copy of the book gratis. Better than a tote bag, if you know what I'm saying.
How will the book be delivered if you make a donation to the bond fund? Do you pick it up at Faith Action or what?
We could mail it to you to keep everything safe, unless you mention in your donation that you'd like to come and pick it up. We'd be more than happy to mail it to you.
Okay, thanks, David.
I have posted in the chat a little link about Damon Henninger, who is the CEO of Core Civic and lives in Tennessee. I think with people like this, it's good to make their lives uncomfortable if we can find ways to do this. People who are millionaires in the business of prisons or pharmaceuticals, like the Sackler family, they buy their way into respectability by giving donations to museums and to art museums and to various other nonprofit things, which is great in and of itself, but it also makes them look and feel more respectable than I sort of think they should be. So just if you're interested, there's a link to him and his name. You can also see pictures of his giant house. These are the people who are profiting from running private detention centers. And, their life could be a little less comfortable, I think.
I see a question in the chat about the logistics, and once we're able to organize the trips again, the logistics will be a little bit different. But for all the people who went, everyone was responsible for their own hotel room, which was one night around $100 approximately. Find provided dinner on Saturday night and lunch on Sunday. So we sent them down with lots and lots of food. And then the participants contributed $50 towards the van rental and gas. So it was not negligible, the amount that it was cost. But luckily, as David mentioned, Faith Action received a grant. So Faith Action will now have grant money to cover many of those expenses, if not all. And several people are holding up artwork now. I see Hector and Mary Coyne are both holding up some artwork.
So if you will unmute yourself and speak, you might come to the front of the screen.
Yeah, Hector, can you unmute yourself and say a little something while you hold the picture up?
Hola. Yeah,
there you
I'm
go.
just holding it Let me see which one. Okay, is the one of a kid talking on the phone with, I guess it's his dad. And this reminds me of, again, during my visit to Stewart that day, we happened to see a family. It was the mother and two kids turned over because their dress code was not the one they wanted at Stewart. I remember we had to drive this family back to El Refugio because luckily El Refugio have some clothes. So we drove the family back to El Refugio. They got some new clothes because after talking to the family and the mother especially, she said, well, we cannot come back because we drove like, I forgot how many hours, but they were not from around. So she was like, we don't have any more clothes. So luckily the El Refugio was there. And yeah, they got some new clothes and they were able to visit their father.
What's really sad about that is that boy was wearing a unique soccer jersey that he knew his father was going to love, and wasn't able to wear that jersey anymore.
So I just want to say about the picture I'm holding up is the waiting room. And honestly, I think it was the first real test of our ability to hold it together and not be unraveled by the way that we were treated, knowing that the people we were going to visit are treated even worse. But what I have to tell you about the waiting room for me personally is several of us from Greensboro were in the room one Sunday morning, and it was crowded. And there was a young woman sitting nearby where I was sitting, and she asked me who we all were. And she wanted to know if we were visiting loved ones. And I told her that we were visiting people that we hoped to talk to, but we were not related to them. And she said, well, why are you visiting them? And I said, well, we're coming to tell them that they are not forgotten and that they are members of our communities and we love them and we care about them. And she had driven 13 hours to see her husband, who she had not seen in 18 months. And she began to cry about the sacrifices that we made to see these people. And I don't think I had a more humbling moment than that one.
Well, I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, so it might be time for us to all say goodnight. Once again.